So for those of you who have been here since the very beginning, you may notice this segment from one of the old live shows. It's time for my top 5, previously named Carson's Criteria. For those of you who don't know, my name's Carson. If you didn't know, the way that this works, it's very simple. I usually have a category like top 5 most underrated Mets or top 5 worst Frank about sports takes, and I list them out in my humble opinion. And then after I'm done with the long-winded analysis, Andrew and Frank can tear it apart, open up screaming matches if they so please. Most of my lists are based off of Mets history, but I'm going to go with the current times this time, and I'm just going to give you my top 5 Mets that need to go. All right. So these players currently hold a spot on the Mets 40-man roster, and in my opinion, should not play another game for the Mets for eternity. So let's start off with number 5 here. This one is pretty easy. Trevor Gott. The Mets acquired Gott for a few weeks before the trade deadline from the Mariners in exchange for left-handed pitcher Zach Muckenhirn with conditions that the Mets could cover former farmhand Chris Flexen's contract. In 29 innings with the Mets, Gott was an unmitigated disaster, surrendering 10 of his 14 earned runs in high leverage spot. Pretty simple. Gott was acquired by Billy Epler for a near $7 million of Flexen's contract. Billy Epler resigned, and now Gott needs to go too. Enough said. Number 4, Luis Guillorme. It was fun while it lasted, of course, but the bearded demigod who caught bats out of thin air and nearly killed Jordan Hicks with a 22-pitch AB in spring training, it's time to let go. Now, Guillorme's defense will always be a plus, but recently, the 29-year-old infielder has become quite the negative asset. Over the past 2 years, Guillorme has posted just a .671 OPS in 455 plate appearances, providing next to no power and bottom 5 percentile speed. With Mets top prospects Brett Beatty, Mark Vientos, and Ronnie Mauricio all at the major league level, the upside capacity of infielders pretty much leaves Guillorme as the odd man out. Although he's had multiple injuries across these past few years, the justification of keeping Guillorme any longer has really run thin. The Mets have a need for a more expansive bench in the future, and Guillorme just is not an ideal piece going forward. Let's get to the hot stove, folks. Number 3, Jeff McNeil. Speaking of ideal pieces, the former batting champion, or as I like to call him, the most obsolete player on this entire roster. To put it simple, McNeil is a powerless bat in a power man's game. If the Mets did not spend $162 million on a center fielder to lead off for them and provide more power than McNeil has ever provided, his role on the team would be a lot more important. McNeil had a rough season in 2023 where he posted a .711 OPS in 648 plate appearances, where he apparently played through a partially torn UCL in his left elbow. Not only did it obviously affect him, McNeil has decided to not undergo surgery to repair the structural damage. McNeil is now 32 years old with 3 years remaining on his contract after signing a 4-year extension with the Mets last offseason. I get it. He can play multiple positions. He's a former all-star, and he give you a high batting average, slapping singles across the field. The problem is, this is not 1976 anymore, only considered an elite player in the eyes of Mets fans. It's frequently said that it's hard to come across a player like Jeff McNeil. That's more of a curse than a blessing, folks. It's not because he's one of a kind, it's because he's not that valuable to a contending lineup. Roast me all you want, Mets fans, you know I'm right. Number 2, the infamous Drew Smith. Ever since the Mets traded for Drew Smith back in 2017, he's been nothing short of a disaster. A boatload of injuries, tons of high leverage meltdowns, and statistically one of the worst relievers in all of baseball among batted ball data. He's always had promising strikeout stuff, but he has not progressed in the slightest. He has terrible command of the strike zone, terrible secondary weapons, can't get whiffs, can't get chases, and surrenders some of the hardest contact in all of the league. It's safe to say that the breakout of Drew Smith is not coming. And after 5 years of terrible pitching, the Mets need to cut ties. Going into a 30-year-old season, relievers are always going to be hit and miss, but sometimes you just need to call a spade a spade. The spaded point is clear. Drew Smith fucking sucks. Accept it. And of course, number 1, the 800-pound nightmare that is Daniel Vogelbach. I am done talking about this guy. We've already promised that we are done talking about this guy. Garbage trade from both sides. A Billy Epler patented move. Epler is gone, and so should he. If I have to see this fat and lazy hippopotamus who is 90% cake frosting and donuts take one more strike 3 looking in the orange and blue, I'm bringing out the horse tranquilizer and finishing the job myself. There's my top 5. 5 guys who need to go. Tear it apart. Go ahead.
Yeah, obviously the only guy that I'm not totally ready to give up yet is McNeil. I feel like there's probably plenty of other pitchers that the Mets have that you could certainly replace him with. But other than that, I mean, it's pretty easy to make a list of plenty of guys that can go, with Vogelback and Smith being 1 and 2, just because of the amount of the roles that they have on the team. The fact that Vogelback, for the most part, was playing every day as a DH, and it just seemed like Drew Smith was involved in way too many high leverage situations that he should not have been in. And he just felt like he was the deciding factor in a lot of games, whether it was blowing the lead, getting rid of a tie, or being behind and then becoming even further behind. It just felt like he was the reason for a lot of Mets losses. Guillorme, that's an obvious one. He's just seemed to regress. And like we said, with the other options the Mets have right now, there really just is no point. And then Trevor Gott, just another Epler failure. So I can't disagree with that one either. But I do think there's probably some other Met pitchers that need to go before Jeff McNeil.
Like who? Who would you put in there besides Jeff McNeil?
Pretty much any other reliever not named Edwin Diaz or Brooks Raley. Like Adam Ottavino, I'd rather get
Even
rid of
after
Adam
that
Ottavino,
2019 season that Edwin Diaz had?
even after that, I'd rather get rid of Ottavino than McNeil. I just think that Ottavino is going to regress even more at his age, that he's just not worth that contract.
That might be the first time you didn't have a shit list.
The first time?
That might be your first perfect list. There's no, I mean, obviously you could throw Starling Marte on there. You could throw Alvino on there. You could throw other guys. This is Frank's list. Narvaez would be number one. There's nothing really to complain. Again, there's plenty of guys. I throw David Peterson on there too if you want. Again, there's nobody on this roster that's like, oh, they needs to be here. I mean, there's maybe like 2, maybe 3.
But yeah, I mean, I had a few I was other considering, but like most of them were just like low hanging fruit of just like, yeah, okay, they're just not that good and there's not really much substance to it. Like, yeah, I could bag on David Peterson, but like obviously the team is in need of pitching, so it's like he's still part of the depth chart no matter what. I also would never go after David Peterson. There are still like a lot of holes. Obviously, the Mets have emptied out quite a few roster spaces. I'm pretty sure a lot of like 12 have been put on waivers already. Obviously, it's going to be a new look team, of course, but like out of like these 5 right here, I think that this is the most you need to. I would just move on from. And listen, I know people are going to disagree with Jeff McNeil. We have one that just disagreed already, but let's be real for a second. This man's just obsolete. Like, what does he provide that Nimmo can't do even better from the top of the line?
I mean, he's going to love Seattle. I mean, it just makes too much sense. He's going to love Seattle. And we got to trade again. Well, are we going to do it this week, maybe next week? I'm going to ship his ass to Seattle. We're going to do some trade, buy or sell. I got the perfect one for everybody, and he's going to love Seattle. So, again, they need a nice little slap hitter that doesn't strike out all the time. So, there you go. He's going to be valuable to Seattle, not to us. So he can go lead off or 9th in Seattle. It's going to be great.